right from the beginning, and I implement this kind of teachings to the kids. When I'm not going to come down, it can share me. Only me, and be come along with Bayeje, when she let me. Now make I'm a beer here. No one be come along, I'm feeling. I'm a Jew, I'm a couple of good, I'm a characters be. No, let my label. I'm a bluff for me, I'm a she's almost film.
Pienso que una de las cosas que más admiro de Estados Unidos, de la cultura de Estados Unidos, que le apuesta muchísimo a la educación, a que sus hijos terminen la educación básica, se vayan a la universidad, porque siento que de una forma mantener el sistema de dominio a nivel mundial. Pero siento que le faltaría la otra parte, la parte humana, en valorar al resto de la gente que habita este mundo.
Y esto yo lo he visto con, por ejemplo, en los Estados Unidos con los afroamericanos, ellos sí respetan a sus viejos, ¿sí? O sea, su abuela, eso sí lo respetan. Y los latinos lo hacen, y los asiáticos lo hacen. Aquí en Westport el problema es que la mayoría son blancos, y los blancos son a los que va dirigido, yo creo que esto, ¿no?
Velimo u Westport, neku zatvorenu sredinu ko Vranje recimo, i sad oni ne mogu tamo, nisu dobrodošli to. I šta da radimo da zatvorimo Westport?
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Banff Centre Talks. I'm Sue Bell Yank, and I'm so pleased to be speaking with Christopher Robbins from Ghana ThinkTank. The mission of Ghana ThinkTank, as you just saw, is to develop the first world. So what does that mean exactly? They collect problems from the so-called developed world and send them to think tanks in places like Iran, Ghana, Palestine, Serbia, and elsewhere, what we might consider the developing world. These ad hoc think tanks brainstorm solutions, and then those solutions are implemented, no matter how profound or absurd. This practice is not gentle, and it didn't necessarily start as a way to actually solve problems. It's really all about emphasizing difference, about revealing what we don't know, but we think we do. It's also about making people aware of their biases by throwing their cultural assumptions right in their faces. So is this art or activism? Is it the work of tricksters? Or a legitimate international development strategy? Is it all of these things or none of them? Ghana Think Tank was founded in 2006 by Christopher Robbins, John Ewing, and Mete Odonkor. They were joined by Carmen Montoya in 2009. Christopher, thanks for joining me on Banff Centre Talks.
Thank you.
So I'd like to start with an example to help describe how Ghana Think Tank works. So take me to the town of Westport, Connecticut, in the US, and what problems did the citizens of Westport have?
Well, Westport's one of the wealthiest towns in the United States. Lots of the hedge fund operators who caused that 2008 crash lived there. And a problem we kept running into there was lack of diversity. People complaining, what did they say? We are too white and wealthy, they complained. So we sent that problem to our think tanks and got a bunch of solutions back. And one was from El Salvador, who said, you know what, we bet you're actually a lot more diverse than you think. You're just not counting certain people. Who's fixing your cars? Who's fixing your house? Who's tending your yard? I bet they don't look like you.
And so how did you implement that solution?
Well, their solution was that we needed to hire immigrant day laborers to attend Westport social functions. That was their solution, which definitely graded a bit, but our pledge is, if it's brilliant or impractical, if we want another culture to be imposed on ours, we need to take it whole and impose it on our culture. And so that's what we did. We paid immigrant day laborers $15 an hour, the same they get for their day laborer work, to attend Westport social functions.
And what was the result of that?
A lot of uncomfortable conversations. I mean, it's what I loved about that solution and about some of the, I guess a train that makes some solutions really effective, even though that's a word I guess we don't usually use to apply to it, is that it's taking something that's right there, all it is looking at it in a different way. And I mean, one thing I learned from it, and I know other people did, was this idea of transaction. I felt guilty doing this, and when we paid them at the end of one of the days, I said, like, you know, I feel a bit, I guess I'm allowed to say it, I feel like an asshole right now, kind of objectifying you for my strange art project. And the response was, it beats roofing, like $15 an hour to drink wine and eat sushi. Like, why is that objectifying me, but not? I guess that, so there was this strange thing of like class that's imposed when you pay for something and that we're okay with. But then when it's shoved into a social realm and we can't ignore that we're associating class with us being in the paying part of the deal, it definitely was clear that that people were making realizations about what their community is. I wouldn't pretend that it changed the diversity of Westport, Connecticut. We weren't putting anybody long-term into there. But definitely, I mean, how you look at somebody you're looking through every day gets changed through an experience like that.
And so you mentioned this solution came from the think tank in El Salvador. So how do you establish these think tanks that are so far-flung and kind of maintain their investment in this process of solving other people's problems?
Well, we only have 2 rules, both of which we've broken. One is no artists allowed, and the other is no NGO workers allowed. And we do that because we feel those are the 2 worlds that we kind of have our feet in, and we want to make sure the voices are coming from some outside of that. We broke the artist one with Iran. They're a group of artists in Tehran, and that is a fantastic think tank. We broke the non-NGO rule in Afghanistan, and that did not work well at all. In terms of how we form them, we always work with existing affinity groups who wouldn't consider themselves think tanks. So in Ghana, it's a group of bike mechanics. In El Salvador, it's a radical rural radio station. In Iran, it's a group of artists. And so we know that they're meeting each other regularly. So over years, we've been working with many of the think tanks consistently since 2006. We always send back reports of what we've done, so it deepens that way.
And so why do you think people want to join these think tanks in the first place? You know, how do you kind of kick off that process?
It's different for different ones. I mean, El Salvador clearly likes the chance to stick it to us. I mean, I'm from the U.S. We call our country America. We call ourselves Americans. We pretend the rest of the continent doesn't exist. And it's clear in their solutions that they like that ability to stick it to us. I mean, for think tanks like the Sudanese refugees seeking asylum in Israel or the prison think tanks we work with, it's in a world where they're being told what to do and everything they do is being dictated to them. They have power, and we're asking them for help, and then we do what they say, and they see that. So it's also connection to another world. And I mean, particularly for the refugees, it gave like a reason as well, because I've never seen a place that felt, a group of people that felt so disenfranchised is the wrong word, just dislocated from any purpose and day. They're just waiting, and their only goal is, I don't want to be forced to go back there, and the country's trying to force them back there. So it gave some purpose in that case. Some do it for the money. There's some cynicism in there as well.
Yeah. So for those who submit problems, how do you go about gathering those problems from different communities and kind of locate which communities you want to gather problems from?
Well, it almost always starts with a commission. So art center or museum or something will, that's branching out into different industries now, will invite us in, and then we play very naive often in this project. So we'll pretend that your community is whoever lives right around you, which for like the new museum certainly isn't the case. And so geographically we'll go directly around there, but also we start by asking about the dominant stereotypes in an area, what neighborhood is stereotyped as what, and we make sure that we're going to those different neighborhoods. And we make it fun. And the initial ask is just to complain. There's like these 2 basic human truths that I think make the project successful, and that's everyone loves to complain and everybody wants to be needed. And so we'll make it fun. Like there's a big red button that says, what's your problem? And you run up and punch that thing and tell us. And you may not even realize that 6 months later, we're coming back to you with video from Iran and Sudan and Eritrea with solutions to that problem you gave. And so that's where I guess like the guilt or the social pressure comes in of look at all the work that's been done, but also, whoa, look at all these different people I probably have assumptions about interested in my issue and giving me ideas.
So I want to unpack the mission of GTT a little bit, which is to develop the first world. So what do you mean, and how did you kind of come up with that phrasing?
Well, it came from all of us working on the fringes of development. And I mean, for me personally, realizing that I was an American who supposedly had solutions for a culture I had not grown up in, and that I had a tremendous amount of power. 3 weeks out of college in Peace Corps in West Africa, I could get a meeting with the mayor, but the farmer who knew a lot more about that village couldn't. And I didn't have a high responsibility. I could head back to my land whenever I wanted. And I saw a lot of troubling things take place. Obviously, that was an unfair power dynamic. And what made it worse is how proud we were of it back in the States. And I don't mean to say that development's not good, but clearly we can't come in there with this mindset that we're healing and saving. Obviously, the people affected by this have to be in control of it. So it was for me, and I mean, I know for Mate, he grew up in Ghana and lived in a village that had received aid and then worked for NGOs. John had wreaked all sorts of havoc trying to do good in El Salvador. I can't go into the details right now, but I mean, one where it was like video activism, and in the end, there was a child who was complaining about a mayor, and he was doing all these corrupt things, and they were like, "This is great, we'll take this mayor down," and instead, like, his grandmother was threatened, the boy was beat, John got death threats, another one of his colleagues was kidnapped, and so we just all very vividly saw the other side of good intentions and the hubris on it, and coming back to the States, we were looking for a way to flip that, to make our own culture feel what it's like when another culture imposes their goodwill on you, even with their best intentions.
So, you and your co-founders have this personal history of working with NGOs. Can you maybe locate one experience that you had in your own time in the Peace Corps that sort of brought this to the forefront for you?
Yeah, I mean, probably the most succinct story was how houses were set up where we lived. They were like a collection of huts in a big circle. And so you had the room that was for sleeping, and the room that was for storage, and the room that was for cooking. And that cooking hut was generally this miserable place. It was like small and dark, windowless, hot, and choked with smoke. So this volunteer had this great idea to build chimneys. I mean, the houses are made from mud and thatched, very easy to put in. So she started building chimneys, and they worked great. Like, they brought all that smoke out. Wasn't a smoky experience. And within weeks, the malaria rate in her village shot up, because malaria is a mosquito-borne disease. And when you're there for hours and hours working, the smoke at least was keeping those mosquitoes away. And lung cancer kills you a lot more slowly than malaria can.
We have this mental image of people joining the Peace Corps because they have some kind of idealistic world-saving complex. So I wonder, just in your own personal history, what was the sort of reason for you to kind of go out there and be in West Africa?
Well, it feels a bit selfish when I talk about it this way, but the honest truth is I wanted an intense cultural experience. And that's really why I joined. And I mean, I'm the kind of person who does a good job. When I would like jerk yogurt on the Upper East Side, I did a good job with the yogurt. And so same thing there. I showed up, I wanted an intense cultural experience where I wasn't a tourist. Obviously, I'm an outsider, but I was part of some small society, and I had a role to play. And that's, like, Ghana ThinkTank started for one reason and has been changing into many others. So did my Peace Corps experience.
So you've described Ghana ThinkTank as a punitive project in some ways. Can you talk a little bit about that? Just like punitive for who?
Well, punitive for the United States initially, but also Western hegemony, like all those grad school words. It was, as I was saying earlier, a way to make my culture feel what it's like to have another culture impose their goodwill on us, and to experience another, like, the misunderstandings we have about other cultures, not as this general theory, but applied to something we've identified that we already care about. And so that's why we're very careful to apply the solutions no matter what we think about them. We're really trying to preserve that idea that came from a very different context. We choose think tanks that are very isolated from the everyday life of the people receiving the solutions, and then we try to impose that as it was given, knowing that it's not going to fit properly, and that friction is where you start to learn. That was my personal experience overseas as well. I wouldn't learn that I was wrong until I was so wrong that reality finally smacked against my wrong assumptions. So Ghana Think Tank is a very efficient way of having reality smack up against our wrong assumptions. And we only care about it when it's about something we actually personally care about.
So maybe we can get into some examples of problems that you felt like really explored that friction between first world, third world, and those cultural assumptions. Can you think of some examples of those that really highlighted that?
Well, one, the day laborers one certainly did. There's one that's I don't know if this is quite a solution, but it's a story that's definitely connected to what you're saying. In that we were in this was Westport as well. So when we were in Westport, as I said, a wealthy place where some of the problems where there's too many golf courses here and the runoff is causing cancer, serious problem caused by something that's hard to be worried about, concerned about. And sorry, what was I saying? Okay, and during that time, our El Salvador think tank was receiving death threats. And there were SUVs driving around the neighborhood asking for the members, trying to find their homes. Someone was actually thrown down a well. And so we had a conversation about, can we actually send these problems to our think tank during this, when they're undergoing death threats? And we were, reviewing the mission of the Ghana think tank and what we've signed up to, which is external to all of us. It's sort of like a Frankenstein that pushes us on. And we realized, we can't treat people as victims. That's one of our rules. And so, yes, we have to treat them as superior to us, even if what they're dealing with is much worse than what we are. So we sent out the problems. And when we got El Salvador's videotape back, I remember watching it. And in the beginning, they go, "Oh, Westport has such serious problems." And we're like, "Oh, God, here it comes." And they're like, "Your grandchildren don't live in the same home as your grandparents? No wonder your country is so fucked up. How is your culture supposed to continue?" And they were seriously concerned about us, and they understood why America is, there, I did it, United States is what it is. And that was a moment of these assumptions definitely colliding into a new reality for both of us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. So at the surface level, taking first world problems and asking the third world to solve them does bring up some controversial ideas. And I think, as you described to me earlier, like some icky feelings at times. So, issues of class, racism, xenophobia, colonialism do crop up. And so maybe you can go into some of those other ways that Ghana Think Tank has sort of chosen to address those issues.
Okay. Those issues you bring up were the purpose we founded Ghana Think Tank, because we knew we were personally implicated in a lot of this, in some neocolonial practices and the other side of good intentions. And this was a way to try to hold us and other people like us accountable for that. In terms of the actual methods we do, it's sometimes we parse it out pretty finely. There's this very similar power dynamics that exist between first and third world exist within any neighborhood. And so we try to identify the dominant assumed power dynamics and flip them. And then see where that takes us. That's generally the method that seems to work.
And you said that you had, you sort of don't treat people like victims. Were there any other kind of rules that you set out for yourself that helped you in that process?
Let's think. There's some things that started bubbling up, like this concept of enemy think tank we started to realize when, it started as a self-punitive project, as we were saying, but we started to realize there were a lot of other potentials in it. The first time that became apparent was with Iran, where I remember this conversation with a Welsh pensioner who clearly thought Iranians were Arab terrorists, but then coming back to him with these super smart and super funny solutions to his issues, it certainly started to humanize that group of people who we probably only knew of through newspaper articles that were probably actually about another country. And so that was the beginning of realizing that there are some other outcomes that could come from this project. And when we started out, we made a rule for ourselves, and it was after 5 years, we couldn't just exist in the art world. In development, there are a lot of earnest people working really hard, and there's a lot of important work that comes out, and we didn't want to be the artist in our little white cave pointing at these people and, "You're not doing it right," and we're not accountable to anything, because in the end, it's a 3-month exhibition. So we committed to trying to see if what we're doing could be relevant in other fields, and also starting to extend the time frame.
So I'd like us now to watch a short video from the Ghana Think Tank website that speaks to some of this friction that you're exploring between first and third world. So let's take a look, and then we can talk about it a little bit more.
Okay, so this time we're solving problems from the Netherlands. The first problem says, who am I to send my problem
to people in country that so much poorer than Netherlands?
Who are we to send our stupid little problems to? They who have much serious problems.
We don't have
Any stupid problem, any problem is a big problem.
Just send it. Don't think about you being from the first word and we're from the third word. No, we don't think about that when we think about your problems.
Don't even hesitate to ask an advice from anyone, even a poor man. He can give you idea that you never thought about.
A rich man can have a problem.
Whether you are a white or you are a black, the solution can be solved by a black person, and the solution also can be solved by a white person. So if the whites make a solution for us to solve, doesn't mean we are superior than them or they are superior than us.
Even though you're living in a first world country and we're living in a region that is always disturbed by war, by poverty, by...
Maybe the Holland more rich than African country, but maybe the African people have more experience to solve the problem.
There's always so many problems to solve. So we're kind of accustomed to being kind of problem solvers. To think, that's how we like to think of ourselves.
We are human beings. We are human beings. We both need solutions from each other.
Excited that you send us your problems, but we really send our thought to you, burner of our heart. It's not something that, you just saying and forget about it, but it's really helpful for us to, share our thought with you. And thanks a lot.
So, I wonder in terms of the responses that were had, maybe you can talk a little bit about the dynamic that was being experienced here.
The dynamic,
between the
okay.
Netherlands and between these think tanks.
Yeah, this was in Leiden in the Netherlands, and usually, you remember what I said earlier? Everybody loves to complain and everyone wants to be needed. Netherlands was one place where the first part wasn't working. Nobody wanted to complain. We have no problems. And then like the leftiest, most sensitive, self-reflexive person was saying things like, how could I possibly send my problems to them who have so many more serious problems? And it was couched in, I don't know if it's the equivalent of NPR over here, couched in this super sensitive context that was actually incredibly infantilizing. And so when we sent that as the problem itself, you can just see from the responses, they're like, we are people too. We're not these poor, not ne'er-do-wells, these poor people who can't possibly help you. And, they stood up to that, but it wasn't just, one thing about those responses were they were loving. That was a pretty offensive thing to say when you start to parse it out. But the responses were very much like, no, we can help you. Don't worry. It's okay. And what was great about that is it felt like we're putting themselves in a higher position. It was almost like talking to a child, like, no, this is why we can help you. Don't worry. Look at all these reasons. We deal with more important problems than you do, so therefore we're better at it. And it's like, that is logical.
Yeah, there was a real generosity in those responses. But I wonder, have any members of think tanks ever been offended by a project or by something that's been sent to them?
Think tank members been offended. Let me think. There's shock. I don't know if that counts. With like a boy that was beating on his sister, or even maybe a simpler thing would be like this idea of freedom and rights, free speech in the United States is, I remember the Morocco think tank pointing out that it's like you're God, that you are not radicals, what's the word, where you're extremists. You are extremists, religious extremists about this idea of freedom and rights. And one simple way that parsed out was somebody saying, complaining about, his dog. Neighbors were complaining about his dog and were calling the police on it. My neighbors say my dog barks too much, but he doesn't. And their solution was, well, if the neighbors are complaining, then of course you need to get rid of your dog. Like the community is more important. And we've had we had freedom of speech problems coming up, and something that was often coming back was that of, yes, there's freedom of speech, but more important is community. And that was definitely a tempering of this branding of freedom and rights as the godly end of all.
So one question that I have is what is the sort of communication that the problem givers and solvers have with you or with each other? Like, how do you kind of mediate that communication flow?
Well, we make the problem collection as fun as possible and so that it's accessible by lots of different people. I mean, when I think about who cares about art, I feel like it's a very small percentage of the world. And then when I think about how most of them only think that art is like a recognizable bust or a landscape, like abstract art, not art for most. And so then when you get down to like who's going to consider this art, if we keep keeping things within those art worlds, then we're talking to this tiny, tiny, tiny little group of people. So we were displaying problems in Austin recently, issues about gentrification on coffee cup sleeves, and on one side was a gentrifier's problem, and on the other side was a gentrified problem. That's how we parsed it out there. And so just people buying coffee were getting this in there. And we built a teardrop trailer from scratch it'll get teardrop trailer enthusiasts or people, they're cute vehicles coming over there to see this thing with a big red button asking your problem. You can punch it and then walk in and you can see as we get the solutions back, we put them on the inside, and we've got a bunch of boat batteries in there so we can roll it back into town and run it as like a workshop, mobile workshop, run some power tools in there. And so we find all these different ways we'll put mailboxes in coffee shops, libraries, movie houses, whatever they're called, cinemas. And so that's a way that we're able to reach people at a lot of different levels, as well as in the gallery. And then
your communication with the think tanks.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple ways we go about it. Usually because we're deliberately choosing and creating and working with think tanks that are remote, because we want there to be a distance. I mean, at this point, it doesn't matter where you live. If we have the same Facebook friends, we listen to the same podcast, obviously we have cultural difference, but we're also sharing an immense amount of culture. And we want cultural difference to be apparent. So we are working with groups that are more remote and sometimes harder to reach. So there's usually one liaison who has dependable internet who can work with. And then sometimes we're able to actually physically be there. Though our role when we're physically there is to shut up, and we're not allowed to push it any direction other than ask them to get more specific.
How do you kind of get the solutions back to the problem givers? You know, how does that process work?
Well, we ask them to give us their contact info. Some people choose to do it anonymously, and in that stage, we have to just find an analogous situation to work it with. And I mean, how it works out is, like I was saying earlier, whatever the reason was you gave that problem, you did identify something you care about. And when you see all these people have given solutions from all these different places to help you out, and we're there, usually with some locally respected institution behind us with a budget, and we're ready to do it with you. Even if you didn't mean to get involved in this, there's actually a lot of pressure to get involved in this. And so what starts as a simple punch a button can turn into a 3-month, see you every other Wednesday sort of thing.
And so you had mentioned, the enemy think tank idea. So I want to get into that a little bit more. Oftentimes you'll kind of curate pairings of problems and think tanks, but sometimes you'll kind of force a conversation by pairing think tanks that are in some kind of direct conflict with each other, either presently or in the past. Prisoners, you mentioned refugees, or even groups that have experienced war on different sides. So maybe you can talk about an example of that happening.
Okay. Well, when we hit our 5-year mark and we had to start being relevant in other contexts, I'd lived in Serbia for a few years, and so we started working in Mitrovica, which is a violently divided town in former Yugoslavia. And Kosovo declared independence in 2008. The Serbian police said, nope, it's still our country, and they ran with Serb laws, and the Kosovo police ran it with their laws, and the UN, since it hadn't been done officially, said we are neutral, whatever that can mean in that situation. And so this town was physically divided by a river, and from the north on up, it was pretty much Serbs, and from the south on down, it was ethnically Albanian. And on that bridge between them were these insane international troops with tanks and crazy-looking machinery protecting them from each other. And so we decided to apply the process differently there, and we asked Serbs to solve the problems of Albanians, asking people from one side of Mitrovica to solve the problems of the others, and vice versa. And how we did it is we pretended to be the naive American who showed up, and Mitrovica is all one. We know you are sick and tired of all these international NGOs telling you what to do, rebuilding your mosques with cheap materials. I mean, it got so dire in Kosovo that when they were writing, they, meaning international groups, were writing the new constitution for Kosovo, and the locals felt so disenfranchised from it, they started wheat pasting up. Like, we would like this to be in our constitution, please, on the entrances to this place to try to have some say in what was going on. And so we would go and say, we're asking Mitrovica to solve Mitrovica problems, and we'll just be the conduit. We didn't tell them we're taking the problems from one side, crossing the bridge, and bringing them to the other for solutions. But they quickly picked that up, and they looked and be like, oh, they are so full of crap. They don't know what they're talking about. Yeah, parking is such a pain in the ass, and we have so many rivers. Why doesn't our water be dependable? And so there'd be a stack growing of shared problems. And what was insane is after 10 days of the process, we were essentially kicked out of the project. This conversation is like, why are you here? And I'm like, why are we here? Oh, well, Ghana Think Tank is no, we understand that. But why are you here? It sounds like we're talking to them. And so we're like, do you want to speak with them? And so they actually invited the group of the Albanians, invited the group of Serbs across, and a group of Serbs and Albanians who hadn't crossed that river that divided them since the war between them ended in 1999 came across to work together on the project and decided to form their own think tank, whose goal was pretty simple. We are going to try to find ways to convince other people just to cross that bridge. So that was an amazing moment of realizing the unintended side effects that this could have, and also realizing that we have to figure out exit plans in ours, where if this is going to last any longer than our fancy little art show, we have to figure out. I mean, I love art shows, but anyway, we have to find ways that we can step out of it and, yeah, make room for the people who are actually there.
And so that was really the first time that had ever happened, that they were like, you guys get out of the middle.
Yeah, it's the first time we got booted out of a project. And it was a great success. I mean, failure and a wonderful success. I mean,
and so how did that kind of turn out in the end? You know, did you ever check back in with this group over time? And
I mean, there were a couple things they did. They did, they said that there was a big unemployment, like 60% unemployment, they said. And so they said, well, what we need is a free public bus service that will take people, but it will only take you across the bridge, anywhere you want on the other side. And so, I mean, for that, it was basically we put the money together and there was enough money for a bus to do that for one day. And then there were river cleanups, which seems super banal, but I did the first one with them. And this is a place where the black shirts, they were called, like big guys from Belgrade would come down and walk their pit bulls along, and they were patrolling the unofficial border between the two. And then there was the graffiti. I remember we're walking down, and on one side it said in Serbian, you know, fuck Albanians. And then on the other side, I'm walking with him, and he goes, oh yeah, that one says fuck Serbia. He's like, see, we do want the same thing. So it's super stressful to be like in this multi-ethnic group, just simply cleaning up garbage to try to make people go back to picnicking there again. So there was, I mean, the real long-term result was sniper shots started up again, and tires were being burnt, and they are not working with each other. What is it, 4 or 5 years later than that? And I mean, the only way, I guess, to get it back going is, I guess, raise more money and recommit to that, or yeah, that would be the first step.
So I think that the Mitrovica project is an interesting turning point for you guys as an organization. And you mentioned it kind of evolved your thinking about what Ghana Think Tank can do. So how have you sort of started to think about it differently?
Well, I mean, the time scale has had to get longer. Like 3 years in development is a very short time. And then 3 months or 6 months, the average art cycle is just incredibly short. And we didn't start out trying to solve problems or make a difference in a sense that could be itemized. But over time, as we started realizing the potential the project had, and also started getting involved, I mean, there's, in Mitrovica, where we were afraid for people's, including our own physical safety, was a different situation than the uncomfortableness of hiring immigrant day laborers in a fancy town. And so what's at stake has grown and grown and grown. We have one ongoing, so we decided to commit to multi-year projects and started outsourcing, I don't know if it's the right word, but building teams in the places that they were going on, so the people doing the work were actually the people affected by it, which kind of completes our cycle. I mean, the whole in how we're flipping how development works is that if it was really working, it should be Ghanaians implementing, not us. We're being the gatekeepers to our own neighborhood, our own community, which isn't a privilege that traditional development does. This isn't to say there have been a lot of other developments, and I totally forgot my train of thought.
Well, let's maybe start with one of your first multi-year projects, the San Diego Tijuana border project.
That's where I was going.
So how did you sort of tell me about that project, how it started, and
that was going? From the Mitrovica example. We were thinking, well, how can we take this home where we can actually be committed for a longer period of time? And when we thought about the closest relationship to Mitrovica in U.S., we thought about immigration issues in the U.S.-Mexican border. And so what we did is we started asking Minutemen. Minutemen are civilian border patrols, people with guns who think Bush or Obama aren't securing the border, so they do it for them. And they're civilians who have taken them on. So we'd ask for their immigration problems and then bring them. We're working with several organizations in Tijuana who bring in deported immigrants. So we're working with think tanks of recently deported immigrants to solve their problems. And there's a lot at stake there and a lot of commitments we have to have for what's going on. And almost everything shot is chest down because everyone needs to be anonymous with it. So that was the beginning of one long-term project.
And how was the process of that different from the shorter-term projects? Like how did you kind of shift the way you were going about those?
Well, a lot of building relationships with existing individuals and organizations. Hiring was like a first stage, just interviewing lots of people to find the right people. So becoming more like an organization. We started, part of it was very difficult and boring because I had to become an administrator and learn all these skills that weren't what we thought Ghana Think Tank would involve. So that was part of its strategic planning, like actually taking on a lot of what NGOs talk about and realizing that like our project was starting to come full circle and fold back into what it was initially questioning. So those were some ways.
And were there was an existing organization that you were working with or building?
The Minutemen groups were established, the Patriot groups in the different places. Southern Poverty Law Center has a hate map database of all these ranging from Nazi youth to on the most pleasant side of the scale are the Minutemen who aren't actually usually killing people. And then we worked with several homes in Tijuana who would take in recently deported immigrants. I mean, in one case, we went to do a session there and nobody spoke Spanish because they lived in the they didn't speak great Spanish because they'd lived in the United States for so long illegally or undocumented and were all kicked out. Imagine that situation. So this place is there, gives 2 weeks of housing and some training and some money to try to help people figure out what's next when your life's changed so drastically, so immediately. So that's been a huge part of it, building alliances with existing organizations who share some of our goals.
And can you describe maybe an example of one of the problems or interactions that happened during that project?
Yeah, there was, one problem was this guy who actually, if you Google search his name, and I'm not going to say his name, you will find a picture of him burning a Mexican flag at a counter-protest to an immigrant rights rally. And he started complaining about, like, look, I was making $15 to $20 an hour in the 80s for my roofing work, and now I make $10 an hour, and it's because of all the illegal Guatemalans and illegal Mexicans they're bringing in. And then as we continued with him, he started talking about, they're not actually benefiting from this either. Like, you see how they have to live to survive on that wage. So they get nothing from it, and they take away from me what they had. And then as we continued on, he started to realize, like, wait a second, they're actually not the problem. It's that employer who's taking advantage of both of us, pitting us against each other to get the lowest wage that it is. And when he's like the merchant bank service, the international bankers and the merchant, I forget what it is. Anyway, the international bankers, their job is to fleece the people. And that was this crazy turnaround that took place, and what made it even more interesting, I guess, hopeful. And we're at the hopeful stage right now, not the, yes, we've done it stage, was when we started bringing this and other problems to the think tanks. We were getting back, without saying that whole thing, we were getting back very similar responses of, look, we're not here against you. We're not trying to take away from you. What we need is a union of legal and illegal workers to demand better wages, to demand that we get treated better. And so that's definitely, we're basically focusing the entire process now on that one issue because we saw that overlap. And going back to the think tank, the think tanks for more specific solutions to that, and then working with the Minutemen groups for specific implementations. Because at this stage, when we brought it to the Minutemen, they're just like, that's too vague. What are we supposed to do with that?
There's another project that's longer term that you're engaged with in Detroit.
Yeah.
And you've developed some other strategies with that one to prepare for kind of an intensive, longer term engagement. So maybe you could speak a little bit about the process of entering that city has been.
Yeah, Detroit's, the solution there came from a Moroccan think tank, and the issue started was American isolationism it started on the neighborly side, that like, I don't know my neighbors. And the Moroccan think tank solution was, well, that's because your architecture is designed to isolate you. You're all obsessed with that single family home with your little picket fence. Somehow in cities, you figured out how to isolate yourselves from each other by giving each of you your own door. Look at Moroccan architecture. We have the riad, which is a shared courtyard. Whether you live in a city or a village, you have 16 homes that share an entrance to their place. And so, like it or not, everyone knows when you leave your place, and it creates this tighter sense of community. So if you want community, you want to know your neighbor, you need to change your single family homes into a riad, essentially. And so we're working with a group of North Detroiters who are forming a urban community trust. I just blanked on that word. And what they've recently purchased with some help from us is a 6-unit commercial and residential building in a really decimated part of North End, where there's one house on that block that a family lives in and one house on the next block, and the rest are all either empty or burnt or gone. And then there's an empty field, and then they have the 2 single-family houses on the other side. So they're creating the land trust, and they're developing those with a goal of making it sort of a sustainable pocket so that people can start to move in. They said they have a one white hipster rule. They're very adamant that this is for Detroiters, and our job is the riad. And so that's functioning in a bunch of ways. I mean, one is physically creating a space that forces that sort of sense of community, I guess, through forcing everyone to enter through the same place. But also we know that, I mean, in Detroit specifically with the Syrian refugees, Detroit is facing massive depopulation, sprawl. They're trying to knock down blocks and blocks of houses to turn into farms to try to condense people. So on the one hand, there's people saying we need the Syrians here, but then there's the Islamophobia, there's the fear of immigrants, and there's also the fact that the first time we went to Detroit, it's been, 2 years building relationships before we started doing anything there. The rental car we got was a New York plates Toyota Prius, and that was the perfect vehicle to I was totally embarrassed, but it was exactly what we needed, because me, the white developer, I'm a developer now as well, artist, was also an enemy there, because we're a vibrant black city is becoming white owned, and with our good intentions, it's that developing the first world sounds witty when you do it in Westport. When you do it in Detroit, it's offensive because it starts to feel a bit true. And so now we're in a position of our project folding back on itself until it's definitely problematic, and the issues we said we were wanting to deal with, we have to deal with, and we're sort of on the wrong side of the question. And so there's all of this complexities going on.
And it sounded like you were super cognizant of that going into the project, and specific about choosing the organization that you were going to work with going into it. And has that kind of developed a different strategy for you in terms of doing this as you enter projects like this?
Yeah, I mean, the tough thing we realized we were looking for was people who had the means to develop a part of Detroit, but who didn't want to make a lot of money out of it. Because what's happening now is lots of people are buying things in Detroit because it's cheap. And I mean, there was 6 rows of houses that were purchased by a foreign corporation. And imagine being the neighbor to this. They're waiting. When they were asked, what are you going to do with it? Their answer was, I don't know, ask us in 10 years. So they're waiting until Detroit's come back and real estate is worth something to sell it. At that point, everybody living on that block who, time and time again, when I'd go up to people on the street, my rule was, if I see anyone, I have to talk to them. And all my New York City scary tingles would go off, because I'm in a place that's dark and there's not many people, and okay, there's somebody, I have to go and talk to them, and and asking, how do you feel about me buying something in this or developing something in this neighborhood? And I kept getting the answer, well, we want lights on, more lights is what we need in there. I know that after I walk away, I'm sure like they'd much rather it be, and I've never wished I was Black more than when I'm there, because I hate to be the white person doing these things. I'm not sure. You can tell I'm totally conflicted about it. And every time we go there, there's love and there's hate, and we get beat up, and we also have get hugs, and we're still working it out and trying to be informed and sensitive. I mean, some of the base rules we've set up is we don't have any ownership stake in this. We gave a non-interest loan so that they could buy the property in the first place. And that they're making the other rules about who it's for, who can live there, those sorts of things. And then we have a 3-year commitment, and they, for the rest of their lives, want to build this. So if things work out, the sticky part is find someone who can do something, who doesn't want to make a lot of money out of it. In our culture, it's crazy. And so, there is like, anyone who's willing to take on this project is, I don't want to say crazy, even though I just said it. It's complicated. That's a terrible way to finish. I'll stop with that.
So next year marks the 10th anniversary of Ghana Think Tank, which is incredible. What do you sort of see as the next step? What do you want to do with this kind of decades worth of knowledge that's come from all this work? And do you think that what you've done has actually any longer term relevance for like peace building, international development, where it kind of initially started from as a reaction to?
Well, there's a couple ways. I mean, Detroit is definitely part of the realizing our project has come full circle and making us go through that in an earnest way. But then there's also, we've started to get interest and attention from other industries. Like a bank recently reached out to us regarding like debt in Netherlands, and an NGO actually from the Netherlands as well. Okay, reached out to us about our process, trying to use this basically as they're cutting out their funding for arts and culture in all the countries they're funding, thinking that the Ghana Think Tank model might be a way to not leave them high and dry. So there's also this desire for other industries to bastardize what we're doing and see if it can be useful under their terms. And if that creates boring art, that's fine. We definitely are trying to work with other industries and let them take the aspects that can be useful for them. Also we have so much video and so much content, and we'd love to just also do in the art part of things, just do some shows where all we're doing is going through all that content and putting it out there, because there's a fraction of everything that we have that anybody ever sees, and that's like the simpler part, the less stressful part.
I mean, philosophically, I guess this is kind of a philosophical question, but can you sort of imagine a future where you're putting yourselves out of a job, where this is something that is maybe no longer as necessary?
Yeah, I mean, actually with this NGO in Netherlands, I was in The Hague talking with them, and they were questioning how this is relevant and where we're from and all those things. And I said, well, it seems like the final solution, like you've succeeded if you're really trying to develop these places, is when you're earnestly asking them for help, right? That's when you've succeeded. And it was definitely a moment like, okay, yes, you're right. So that was just a conversation, and there's a huge distance from that to actually doing anything about it, to that actually working. But yeah, of course. And also the way, I guess I'll say it, like, come on, we're on the down. Like, the United States this can't keep up. And so inevitably we are going to have to depend on others. And yeah, I hope that also comes from positivity, not just desperation, meaning honestly understanding that other people are people, even if they're poor or your enemy in your mind. But part of it's going to have to come from desperation.
Great. Well, that's my conversation with Christopher Robbins and Ghana Think Tank. And I'm Sue Bell Yank, and this is the Banff Centre Talks. Thank you for watching, and thanks for listening.
Thanks.